All scientific studies and discoveries are always based on evidence. But this crucial need for evidence is also the reason we haven't yet figured out much about one of the most complex stages of human life: death. There's no way of knowing what happens because you can't ask a deceased person how they describe the vibes of the whole thing, or so we thought. This accidental discovery has taken us a step closer to understanding death. Here's what the discovery gave us and how it was made. For the first time in science, in fact, for the first time in human history, we now have a glimpse into the dying human brain. Since the dawn of humanity, there have been countless different ideas and beliefs about what a person actually feels during their final moments before death. Perhaps the even more pressing question is whether or not the brain stays alive after the body has died. But earlier this year, purely through accident, Dr. Ajmal Zamar, neurosurgeon at the University of Louisville, and his team tracked the brain activity of a dying person, providing a real-time recording of his brain's final workings. So what really went down? It was thanks to an 87-year-old patient's remarkably timely demise. Apologies for that, old man, but your death really was a scientific feat. This patient had to go through brain surgery to remove a blood clot from his brain, caused by something called subdural hematoma. Don't be shy. Bring out your pencils and your textbooks. This is a science lesson. It means bleeding between the brain and the skull. In short, it's a condition that, really sucks. After this brain surgery, the patient seemed to be recovering well for 3 days, but then the poor guy started having seizures. Before his surgery and brain bleeding, he didn't have a history of seizures, so this led doctors to perform an electroencephalogram, or EEG, routine on him. This, folks, is when the doctors were standing so close to an unmatched discovery in neuroscience, but they didn't know it yet. During an EEG, electrode patches are attached to a person's head, much like in sci-fi shows. Here, they're meant to detect what's causing brain abnormalities like seizures by recording brain waves. And during this very process, our 87-year-old patient had a cardiac arrest and died. Guess what that means? The doctors were left with a 900-second recording of measured brain activity. This has never happened before. Let's move on to the fun part. What did the doctors see? So what did they observe in the dying brain? Unlike the idea people generally have of the process of death, that it's a gradual decrease in brain activity until it just shuts down, the truth appears to be very different. Out of the 900 seconds of recording around the time of death time, the researchers focused on the most important parts: 30 seconds before and after the patient's heart stopped. Yes, you heard it right, after the heart stopped supplying blood to the brain. Put your spooky pants on, folks. So when we say recorded brain activity, keep in mind that this isn't footage obtained through an iPhone. It's almost like a language of its own based on neural oscillations, which is just a fancy name for brain waves, and that's just the rhythmic electrical activity constantly going on in our brains. So think of it as footage that tells the story through signals and waves. Another thing you need to know is that you're about to hear a lot of Greek numerals. Dr. Zamar reported that right before and after the heart died, they observed a noticeable change in the gamma oscillations as well as the delta, theta, alpha, and beta oscillations of the patient's brain. Told ya, Greek numerals. But the most important brain waves that went wonky are the gamma and the theta oscillations. This is because gamma oscillations are associated with high cognitive functions. Now, before you run to get your middle school science textbook, let us tell you that these include brain processes such as dreaming, recalling information, and concentrating. Are you connecting the dots here? The theta waves, on the other hand, reflect the half-awake, half-asleep state of mind. Sort of like when you're dreaming, but it feels so real, even when you're aware it's a dream. Or when your brain just makes everything happening around you a part of your dream. Also, there was a surge in activity of the visual cortex of the brain. This is the part that controls our vision. Wait, could this really mean live flashbacks? Let's just say that the melodramatic flashbacks that characters have in movies right before they die might not be that far off after all. During all the 30 seconds before and after the supposed death, these pattern waves kept going, and these patterns were similar to the patterns recorded when a healthy person's asleep and dreaming. So yeah, what we know so far for sure is that our brains do indeed exhibit a heightened activity, but what this could feel like for the person experiencing is still in the educated guess realm of things. The evidence we have so far suggests that this might very well be that movie trailer-ish flashbacks of our lives running in front of our eyes, or through our brains to be more accurate, is quite possibly true. Now the question we're all asking, is it the good memories or the bad ones? Thankfully, Dr. Ajmal Zamar thinks that these could quite possibly be the best and most important memories that we've collected over the course of our lives. Of course, these would be different from person to person, but the concept's the same. He says there's no reason the brain would play the traumatic memories in those moments. Who would have thought that the weird kids in middle school who'd scare you by saying that people watch the movie of their lives after they're dead were onto something? But again, it can be either spooky or fascinating. It depends on where on the philosophy spectrum you are. Now, let's compare this to the studies of the past. In scientific research, it's the comparison of a study to the previous works that determines how much weight a theory carries. Or maybe the more professional way to put this would be, does it have sauce? And if so, how much sauce are we talking about? Remember, there are no doubts about the surging brain waves in the final moments. The discovery of those measurements stands right there in all its glory. The question researchers are now talking about is, was this just a coincidence? Also, how sure are we that it's a person's life flashing before their eyes? The 2013 study on rats provides heavy support to the recent findings. In 2013, 9 rats were closely analyzed. First, 6 electrodes were attached to these 9 rats, and their brain oscillations were observed. Once that was done, the rats were euthanized with a lethal injection. We let you down, Remy. Then, the brain activity of these rats before and after they died was recorded and compared with that of people who'd been in near-death situations. Surprise, surprise, the data was similar. What's more, the data from rats was actually quite similar to that of Dr. Zamar's deceased patient. Similar gamma wave surge and also heightened brain activity combined with hyperconsciousness. Another piece of evidence is the data collected from the EEGs of healthy people. When healthy people's brains were observed during EEG routines, while they were made to perform memory recall tasks, not only a rise in gamma oscillations was recorded, but also the wave patterns very similar to the deceased patients. Now, you can see why he's so convinced about the memory recall theory. He said that they're going to design experiments to prove this theory, but that can be a very tricky thing to do. Okay, time for the good old grain of salt. With every scientific theory come doubts. That's just the process. And in this case, the only thing that has created some resistance to the flashbacks theory is the state of the patient whose brain was examined. The case here is that the 87-year-old patient was suffering from seizures and brain swelling, so his brain activity could have been intervened by that. Had his brain been normal, maybe his brain waves would have shown a different pattern. Let's be fair here. This factor can't be ruled out completely, but still the evidence in favor of the theory is much more plausible. We can only wait for the results of those experiments Dr. Zamar promised us to see what's what. Also, it changes the perception of death. The fact the last thing our brain potentially does is play back the best highlights of our lives is quite surreal to think about. It can actually change the way we see death, especially the way we cope with death of someone close. It's always hard to imagine what someone must have gone through in their last moments, and now that we're closer than ever to figuring it out, turns out it's not so bad at all. Dr. Zamar himself hopes that this will help him cope with the stress that comes with having to be the bearer of bad news to the family of a deceased patient. As he puts it, something we may learn from this research is, although our loved ones have their eyes closed and are ready to leave us to rest, their brains may be replaying some of the nicest moments they've experienced in their lives. Stop cutting the onions already. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think the life flashbacks could be a real thing? And would you even want it to be a real thing? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for videos like this. See you in the next one.